It's been a long time since I've done a box office video, but we finally have something to talk about. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. We finally have movies. Kind of. We're going to talk about it, what came in the top 5 at the box office this weekend. Like I said, it's been such a long time since I've done one of these videos. So if you guys like this series, you would like to see it kind of start back up on this channel, be sure to let me know that in the comments. Hit that thumbs up button. And I love talking box office, I really do. But we are in unprecedented times, so the numbers that I'm reporting today are so much different than what we've ever gotten from movie theaters before. So we're going to try our best to at least make sense of these numbers that we got this weekend. Again, we are just living in a time where we haven't gotten box office numbers like this since like the 1970s, the 1980s. These numbers are so low. But with movie theaters doing, 1/3 half capacity and not every theater open in the United States and Canada, internationally, I think the numbers are a bit better, especially when we get to that number 1 movie. And you can probably guess what that's going to be. But in the United States, we're just going to talk maybe what we got not living up to those expectations. So let's start at the number 5 spot. We have the Spongebob movie, Sponge on the Run. Now, if you're not living in Canada, you probably haven't seen this movie. It is in 326 theaters, and I am almost positive they're all in Canada. So what you're seeing at this 5 spot is the box office from Canada only, and SpongeBob made $345,000 this weekend, bringing its total to a little over $3.3 million. That is also the worldwide total. Again, these are the only locations it is open in the world. So SpongeBob, congratulations. Now, it's difficult, too, for animated films, especially when you're only opening in essentially one location. It's also the kind of movie that you have to take your family to. I am almost positive you're not going to see lots of 40s and 50s and 60-year-old individuals going to this movie without kids. And in the midst of a pandemic, I have a feeling a lot of families aren't wanting to go to the movie theater. So not only is it the lack of the older age group, for a film like this, kids essentially have to go, and you see this total at a little over $3.4 million. Well, that's the reason why. Now, what is the budget for the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run? That is $60 million. So what we see now obviously isn't going to cut it, but this is a film that is coming to, I believe, CBS All Access, VOD. Eventually, that's where it's going to hopefully recoup those numbers. And it's the SpongeBob movie, so I have a feeling a lot of people are going to want to see it. We don't know when the release date will be specifically, but I've been hearing 2021 for CBS All Access. Maybe VOD prior. Regardless, it's going to take a lot to hit that $60 million. We did see a movie in Trolls World Tour, and we'll be drawing this comparison a little bit later when we talk about Mulan. Trolls World Tour actually did fairly well according to the studio. It brought in some pretty good numbers, so I have a feeling we will be seeing a similar thing from SpongeBob. But as of right now, Canada, you've seen the movie. Is it good? Let me know. Coming in at number 4 for the second weekend in a row is The Personal History of David Copperfield, $361,000. That's a 24% drop, even though it added 190 theaters. That's mostly because theaters are finally starting to open up a bit more. Now, if you look at the per theater average, $232 is not great. The film as a whole has brought in $11 million worldwide, and that's mostly due to the fact that it did drop in other locations way earlier in the year, even before the pandemic. I remember in certain countries it came out in January, so $11 million is okay. The budget itself is $15.6, so it still hasn't been able to recoup that money, and it is a bit behind when you factor in the marketing itself. So a ways to go for David Copperfield. Haven't had a chance to check out the movie, but that came in at number 4 this weekend. Had number 3. Number 2 last week is Unhinged, dropping 35%, $1.6 million, adding 71 theaters. The film has grossed $23 million worldwide on a budget of $33 million. Another film that has a bit to go before it reaches that. I believe this film would have made a bit of money if we weren't in these circumstances. Unhinged, made for a relatively lower budget than what we're used to seeing. It is one of those movies that I believe could appeal to a smaller audience, almost a cult following. But again, you just kind of have to factor in not a lot of people showing up to the theater. But still, I mean, $11 million, pretty good under the circumstances in the United States, $23 million overall. Had number 2. Number 1 last week, The New Mutants. 3 years later, dropping 59% in its second weekend, bringing in $2.8 million in the United States. We'll talk about the overall numbers here in just a second. Even after it added 342 theaters, it still isn't quite doing what I think they expected, even in the midst of this pandemic. The movie has made $19.9 million worldwide. Surprisingly, only 8.5 internationally. I figured it would do a tad bit better there, but $11 million domestically is not going to cut it for a film with a budget of $67 million. I'm still baffled they decided to release this in theaters, not putting it on Disney Plus for some reason, where I truly believe it would have gotten more of an audience. I still don't think the film is the worst of the X-Men movies, but I completely understand because it just isn't garnering that interest that we've seen from the X-Men franchise before. Part of that is the fact that the universe is now done, and the other half is the fact that we are in a pandemic, so not a lot of people are going to go out and see a film like The New Mutants when there wasn't that much interest to start with. So the overall gross, a little under $20 million worldwide, really a box office flop. I do think it would have done slightly better, but even without kind of the situation that we're in right now, I still would have released it on Disney Plus. And I still can't believe they released it in theaters after all of this time. So, number 2, not shocking, but it's not doing well. All right, number 1, opening weekend for Tenet. So I think this was kind of the film that we were going to measure what the box office success could be. Now, keep in mind that some of the major markets in the United States are still not open. In California, in New York, we look at a place like New Jersey, we're still kind of waiting for the places where the majority of the numbers are going to be. But if you look at the theater count in the United States in general, most of them relatively, are now open. So the film came in with $20.2 million. Now, that is domestic. And normally we see the domestic percentage be a lot higher than 13% of its gross. Its overall gross worldwide is $146 million. So let's look at the budget. The budget for Tenet is $225 million, which is the most expensive original film that Nolan has ever made. So the studio said, we're putting it all in, everything we have into this movie, not knowing what we were all going to be going through. So I think without the pandemic, we could have expected maybe $50 to $60 million for the opening weekend for a Christopher Nolan film. If we look at what Dunkirk's opening was, Dunkirk came in at a $50 million opening, collected ultimately $190 million domestically. So that's kind of around where we could have expected Tenet, except I truly believe Tenet would have made a lot more. I think it could have cracked $200 million domestically, with the worldwide total being much, much bigger. More along the lines of what he had with Inception, probably below that. Because of the reviews being a bit more divisive than a movie like Inception. But, again, we have to look at circumstances. So, I don't think $146 million worldwide at this point, after being open in a few places for a few weeks, opening in China this weekend to $30 million, I believe one of, if not the highest Nolan original movie openings in China of all time. So that's great. Warner Brothers has to be thrilled about that. It's the $20 million domestic opening that kind of concerns me a bit. And again, we're applying in all of these different circumstances. The fact that theaters are only taking a certain amount of people, they're blocking out seats, they're being as safe as possible, according to everything that I've seen. I've not obviously been to every single theater, but a lot of variables and circumstances that are being thrown in. I know the screenings that I went to, not a lot of people there. Which, for me, I'm like, oh, this is great. But then I think about it, and I'm like, oh, a movie like Tenet, you want to see more people there in terms of the box office numbers. So I'm not shocked with $20 million, but even I expected at least 30. I thought 30 million was a pretty solid number after everything's going on. But we didn't hit that number. 20.2. It seems extremely low. Less than half of what I believe it would have made without the pandemic. And I also think some of the reviews have kind of turned people around. People that would have seen it if it weren't for something like that B cinema score. So a lot of circumstantial elements to throw into what looks to be an extremely low opening weekend, but we've never had to go through this before. This was the test. Tenet was the movie to kind of bring us back to at least close to where we used to be. So I don't look at this as horrible. I need to wait and see what that second weekend is like. If we see a 50% drop, that's when my concern will go up a little bit. I'm expecting maybe a 20 or 30% drop. I really hope it comes in 15 to 17 million on its second weekend, but this was Labor Day weekend. I mean, I thought the numbers would be higher. So if you're asking me personally, yeah, I am a tiny bit disappointed. But again, we've just never been through anything like this as a country. Then again, as a species. In other countries, they're kind of rolling a bit further than the U.S., so that $126 million international number is honestly not that bad. But even that would have been much higher. Now, when we compare that to a movie like Mulan, that released on Disney Plus for $30, the extra fee on top of what you're already paying, that's going to be kind of the ultimate comparison. It's like when Disney releases those numbers, and who knows how long that will be. We'll see how Disney feels about that, and if that's successful, we may start to see theaters and movie releases shift altogether, because that's an option, that's an avenue that they could go. Maybe not that specifically, maybe not $30, but movies could start going even more so if Tenet doesn't improve, and if Mulan is a win for Disney. And again, going back to Trolls World Tour, that film did extremely well for the studio. So we are just going to have to sit back, grab our popcorn that we made at home, and see what happens. But as of now, 20 million is the domestic opening for Tenet, and overall $146 million, which isn't honestly the worst, but $225 million budget. We need this movie to start rolling a tad bit more. But I want to know in the comments down below, how do you feel about the box office this weekend? What do we have to compare these numbers to? Honestly, nothing. We have nothing to compare them to. This is new, brand new. We've never seen anything like it. So I apologize if my comparison game wasn't as strong, but I appreciate you guys watching this. Again, if you like this series and you want to see it every single week, I think this would be a fun video to do on Monday. Just let me know. And if you guys enjoy it, we'll definitely bring it every single week. When we start getting more movies, maybe there will be times when we don't have as much to talk about. Regardless, appreciate you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you hopefully tomorrow.